All right, my beloved Madridistas all over the world, welcome back to the channel. I want to talk about a really important issue today. There's nothing going on the football front, but I want to talk about the Super League because it's something that is very heavily associated with Real Madrid and Florentino Perez. So I think it's really important that all of us understand what the issues are, the logic, and what the problems are with it. Now, listen, before I get started with that, I just want to remind you guys that this week, in the next few days, I'll be putting out a really detailed preview of the Man City match. Looking at the matches the last couple of years and trying to analyze tactically, what I think the key factors will be. And also, for those of you that didn't see this video I put out the other day, I just want to remind you, I will be doing a live stream from the Sagrados Corazones just down the street at the time that the Real Madrid bus arrives. It's one of the most incredible experiences you can imagine. So what I'm going to do is I want to do a live stream to capture that moment and sort of share it with all of you in the channel. So you can watch that video if you want more details, but I just wanted to remind you of that. But let's talk about the European Super League. It's a really big deal. It's a very hot topic. Like I say, it's very heavily associated with Real Madrid and Florentino Perez, so we need to kind of understand what's going on. Look, I'm the biggest fan in the world of Florentino Perez. I think he's one of the smartest guys in the world. Certainly the smartest man in world football. But, this may not be his finest hour. I think his first proposal was, awful. And we're going to talk about this latest proposal, which, I don't think really solves the issue either. But anyway, thanks for being with me as always. Really, really happy about, how the channel's growing and all of your kind of, subscribing and comments, etc. So thanks for being with me. And let's talk about the Super League. Let's get started. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, let's get started on this discussion about the Super League, which is such a hot topic, such a contentious topic. Now, first of all, let's start with why. I mean, why is Real Madrid and some other clubs so sort of hell bent on this initiative? And it really comes down to essentially. I mean, obviously, money. We can't hide that fact. But, it has to do with, control over your own content. I think every club should own its own content and control it. And I think that, what Florentino Perez has been struggling with is that, the club feels like it doesn't have control over the format, the structure of European competition, and to a great extent, even the economics. At the moment, obviously UEFA has a monopoly on European competitions effectively. The way things work is that decisions are made between UEFA in consultation with what's called the ECA, which is the European Club Association. Decisions that are made are sort of in consultation with each other. Of course, the ECA is run by, the chairman is Al Khalifi, who is the head of PSG, who's also somebody that has a very, very tight relationship with Seferin, which, has annoyed a lot of other clubs. So, I don't think Real Madrid feels like they are in control of either the format or the revenue collection of what they consider their own content. So I do sort of understand that logic. Another thing that Florentino thinks is that football, may be losing interest the way the world develops with social media and things like that. And he believes that, we need to bring attention back to the sport, and that if you have the top 15 teams playing against each other all the time, that will sort of revive interest in the sport. Now, there may be an argument there, and, I understand. But it sort of tends to phrase it in terms of, we need to save football and things like that. But at the end of the day, this is about money. It's about controlling your own content and controlling the monetization of that content. So, all right, let's talk about the first attempt at the European Super League, which was back in April 2021. And sort of out of the blue, 12, big clubs in Europe sort of announced their departure from the Champions League and the creation of this new European Super League. Now, just to let you know, this is not the first attempt at this. There was an attempt in 1998 by a group called Media Partners to do something similar. It was an initiative that also failed. And then in 2003, there was also an initiative by what was called at the time the G14, who again were just a group of big clubs trying to sort of break away from UEFA. And that attempt failed as well. Now, the first attempt, which was in 2021, the structure of that was as follows. Okay, there were going to be 20 clubs involved, two groups of 10. The top 3 of each group would qualify automatically to the knockoff round, and then the 4th and 5th in each group would go into a playoff to see who would progress to that final qualification round, which would have been a quarterfinal. Now, the fundamental problems with this, which were, very well vocalized in the media and former players, and certainly by the fans, is that, it was very elitist in nature. So basically, of the 20 clubs, the first 15 sort of had a permanent seat. I mean, it was sort of like the United Nations Security Council. I mean, they had an automatic presence. Even if they had a horrible tournament, they would automatically qualify for the following year. They could never be relegated, so to speak, or kicked out of the competition. And if you looked at the clubs that were designated to be in those 15, I mean, it didn't make a lot of sense. I mean, you had some clubs that, had never won the European Cup, right? I mean, Man City at the time had never won it. Tottenham Hotspurs had never won it. Arsenal, PSG. These are big clubs with big followings, but in terms of European pedigree, I mean, they don't deserve, that kind of a seat at the table. And then, you also had clubs that had been performing very, very poorly over the past few years, Man United or AC Milan, clubs that have a great legacy, but that, just had been awful for the last, decade or more. And it just felt very counterintuitive that they would automatically get permanent qualification. And then, as well, we can't forget about this. There were other historic clubs that have won the European Cup more than once, who somehow didn't fall into this elite group of 15. So, Ajax, Amsterdam, I mean, one of the great clubs in the history of football. Oporto, again, who has won it a couple of times. I mean, it just seemed very unfair, very elitist, and it was very, very clear that this was just about who has the biggest fan base and how can you maximize monetization. So, all of this led to massive protests, understandably so, primarily in the UK, and, clubs had to back out immediately. So Man City and Chelsea were the first to back out, unsurprisingly, because they're the clubs that, don't need the extra money. So, the whole sort of thing fell apart. But, 3 clubs kind of continued with the effort. Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Juventus kind of, kept it alive. And listen, so after this, first disaster, UEFA's response was to try to appease the clubs. They increased the purse distribution to clubs a little bit. They changed the 4th place from sort of conditional entry to the Champions League through qualification. They changed it to sort of, fixed participation. So they tried to throw the clubs a bone to try to alleviate the situation. But, it obviously didn't work because this is still back on the table. So now the new group is called A22, which, let's face it, it's kind of a ridiculous name. So a bit of a disaster from a marketing standpoint. But there's a new proposal from A22 to sort of try this again. Now, one important thing to remember is that the European Court of Justice came to a decision a few weeks ago as to, whether UEFA had the right to either block or penalize clubs from doing this. So, UEFA obviously after the first try threatened to say, oh, well, your players won't compete in the Euro Cup if you do this, etc. Now, when the European Court of Justice decision came out, both sides were kind of claiming victory. But it's not true. I mean, the clubs won. This was a resounding victory for, the likes of Real Madrid, Barça, Juve, etc. From a legal standpoint. So right now it's not something that can be legally stopped, but does that mean that it'll work? So let's talk about this second proposal that's come out, right? Okay, the way that the new system would work, as it's proposed, there would be three tiers of teams, sort of the star competition, the gold competition, and the blue competition. The star and gold competition would have 16 teams, so 2 groups of 8. The blue competition would have 32 clubs, so that would be 4 groups of 8. And the way that sort of relegation and promotion would work is that between star and gold, the bottom 2 of the star group at the end of the season, the bottom 2 would go down to gold, the top 2 of gold would go up to star. And the same thing would happen with gold and blue. So the bottom 2 of gold would go to blue, the top 2 of blue would go up to gold. And that's theoretically how you would move among groups. Now, if we concentrate on the blue group, this is where things start to get problematic. So every season of the 32 teams in blue, 20 of them at the end of the season would be knocked out. So, we're talking, 62.5% of the teams in the blue group are just out. Now, if you think about this objectively, if you start at the gold category, which of course the original big clubs would. So if you're Real Madrid and you start at the gold category, you're never going to leave European competition. No matter how bad you get, because you'd have to be the worst 2 in that group. Then you'd go into gold, and then you'd have to be the worst 2 in gold. And then you'd still be participating because you'd go down to blue. And of course, you can make your way back up in any of these circumstances. So it just feels like if you start in gold, there's no way in hell you're ever going to be removed from European competition, which feels, quite unfair. And if you look at it from the other perspective, if you start in blue, if you start at the bottom, or if you're coming from a domestic league, it's like impossible to make it to star. How on earth are you going to get to star? You have to, first of all, the first year you have to avoid not being part of the 62.5% that get kicked out again. You have to be top 2 out of 32 teams. You would then have to be top 2 out of the 16 teams in gold just to get to the star competition. So it feels really, really, really difficult, and it does continue to feel very elitist. Now, there are also, additional problems, because how do you choose the domestic teams to get into the blue category? Because, imagine that 3 or 4 of your clubs are already in either gold or star. So then now you're picking teams into the blue category that are like 5th or 6th in their domestic league. It just feels very, very messy, and I don't know how this would all work out. Now, look, if you kind of zoom out and look at this objectively, and again, I love Florentino Perez, but I just don't see how this flies. It's a little bit less elitist than the first proposal, but it is still extremely exclusive in my mind, especially because the teams that are going to start at the top. So I honestly don't think that this is going to fly. Even if they're legally able to do it, I just don't see how popular opinion, supporters would accept this. So look, the revenue difference between playing in the current Champions League and what the big clubs would make in the new format is absolutely massive. So I understand the financial incentive, but from a sporting point of view, I think it's unfair. I think the competition should be as open as possible. I'm a romantic. I think what Leicester City did a few years back is like one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see. And I love to see unexpected teams, win the Champions League, win the Euro, etc. So as much as I love Florentino Perez and I understand what he's trying to do, I just don't think, certainly in this format, I don't think it's going to fly, and I just don't think it's fair. So anyway, listen, those are my thoughts on this whole issue. And like I say, it's important to know about it because it's so heavily associated with us. But listen, those are my thoughts. I thought I'd share with you during these quiet days. Like I say, I'll be back in the next few days to talk about the Man City preview. But again, as always, thanks for for listening, for joining me, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Okay? A la Madrid.